Hi everybody. Thank you for coming to this session, setting up your digital project for success. I'm going to apply it to a case study of lessons learned from a 70-site migration to Drupal of a global brand, of which I was the project manager. I have my colleague Ferran Bermoni here, who also worked on the project, and he will help with answering questions. There's a lot of material I want to cover, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. It's going to give you an overview. There's a lot of references to materials which you can easily find online for templates and stuff like that. So I hope you find this useful. So who is this project for? Okay, so this project is it's definitely for project managers. So maybe about 5% are project managers with PMBOK certification, but the rest of the people are temporarily involved in a project or occasionally with no specific project management training. Although this is geared towards project management, it's definitely useful for anybody involved in a project, and they can benefit from it. So my name is Antonella Severo. I'm an ISIT project manager at Nestle Global Services Spain. I've worked in project management for many years for corporations, educational institutions. I worked at a Drupal agency for more than 5 years, and I also did some freelance consulting. I have the dubious honor of owning a first name account on LinkedIn social media. I'm originally from New York. My parents are from Italy, and I've been living in Barcelona for the last 14 years. I love to do fitness. Music is very important to me, playing, going to concert. And I also love to make costumes. And here you can see me where I won first prize as Drupal Hero at our company's superhero theme party last year. So now let me talk a little bit about the project. I want to give context of where we're coming from. So at Nestle, several years ago, the vision was to consolidate the global IT solutions. So we were going to simplify them, standardize them, and share. I work in the web CMS, which handles the brand websites. And at that time, there were 2,000 plus sites on 100 different CMSs. So we definitely needed to, simplify that. And there was a company-wide mandate to migrate all brand sites to Drupal by 2020, which we're nearing the end of. So why was Drupal chosen? It's an enterprise level CMS. It's open source, scalable, multilingual, and much more, as you all know. But especially important was that there's a large Drupal community. Drupal has a global presence, which is important for us to be able to find Drupal agencies for our local markets. And we went through a masterization process. So we had our official hosting providers that the markets had to use. For the technology, we have Drupal, and we also built our internal Drupal distribution, which is called Lightness. Then for each global business, we had a master code base. And a level below that, for each brand, they created site templates. And then the child sites were the production sites where they had their own database, configurations, and content. And the benefits of Lightnest having this Drupal distribution, there's many, because it facilitated our third-party connectors, reduce maintenance costs. But one of the most important ones is that it freed up agency time and budget so that they can focus on the features that really were important or mattered to the market, that they were more innovative so that they're not spending their budget on features that already existed in other markets. So this innovation was clearly important. So I'm going to move on to the actual project that I was tasked to do, which is the corporate site migration. When we started the idea of migrating the projects, when we first started when we first started on Drupal, we were still at Drupal 7 on a multi-site model. By the time we got to the corporate sites, we moved on to Drupal 8 using the Lightness distribution. And the scope for this project was to lift and shift 75 of the sites which were still on a customized SharePoint 2010 platform. And the idea was to build like for like and just migrate it directly. In hindsight, it would have been better if we had just looked at the whole thing and, kind of done a new restructuring. But at that time, we really had an issue. Um, there was a risk because the product was reaching extended support end of life. So it would have left the solution vulnerable to new security threats and without fixes to critical bugs. So we definitely had a timeliness factor. And so we needed to replatform 30 components, 10 content types. There were 10 multilingual sites, not to mention 40 sites that were not in English. Oh, and the idea was to complete it in 2 to 3 months. I was like, really? I mean, okay. I mean, maybe just the migration could take 2 to 3 months if you were doing content out, content in. But if you really thought of it, I thought of it, I thought, what are the phases required? I talked to other people. I mean, in a typical development project, I mean, maybe 2 to 3 months is the migration, but in a development project alone, it would take 2 to 3 months. We had to build the structure for the content to go into. Granted, we didn't really have to worry about the sitemap, the structuring, the content development. But then there's other tasks involved also. We had to schedule and budget the process, contract out, do the resourcing. Um, and then there's still another layer on top of that, which is creating a business case, structuring the project, requirements, and then at the end, there's closing activities. So if you look at all of these different tasks, you see that they can be divided in 4 different phases: initiation, planning, execution, and closure. And across all of them is project management. And these are and also there's another way to look at this, which is known as the project management quadrant. And there's a fifth element here, which is called monitoring and controlling. So I'm going to be talking about these 5 phases in this presentation. So let's start off with initiation. Most projects run into problems because there's not enough definition, or the objectives or scope are unclear and correct. So there's certain things you can do to avoid this. And one of the first things you do is you have a business case or project charter. And this outlines the business rationale for undertaking a project and the value it will give. And it's used to provoke discussion while you're doing it, and it helps manage expectations. So the things that typically can go into a project charter are these 7 items, which I'll go into a little bit more in depth. So project definition objectives. This can be as simple as 3 paragraphs. And the important thing to keep in mind is when you're writing the objectives, you want to write the objectives for the project, not the product. For example, the product might be a brand site with some e-commerce, and you want to gain certain amount of revenue by the end of the year. But the project objective might be, we want to streamline the editorial interface to make it easier for content editors to manage the content, which was the case, which was our case. Another thing to keep in mind is use action words, because people don't really want to fund things that are just maintaining and supporting. And another important one is to give your project a short name. You want to brand your project. You want to, people to understand what it is right away. This was something I failed to do. So the project name was Corporate Site Migration to Drupal. So imagine putting that on every single email. It takes up half the email subject. So you really want to make it short and snappy. Like something like Project Alpha, Project Sapphire, whatever you want, have fun with it. Then stakeholders. It's important to give a reflection of all the stakeholders that you will have that will impact the project or be impacted by the project. This will help you set the appropriate governance and financial commitment. And you want to avoid hidden stakeholders. So here in the initial charter here, you're going to list the stakeholders that are directly involved in the project, their name, title, role in project, responsibilities. And know that this will change throughout the lifetime of your project probably. Another big area is project scope. So the usual trifecta is cost, time, deliverables, and how it impacts quality. I've seen constraints go up to 12. I was basically working with 6. So deliverables, is a high level list of features. What will be delivered concretely? I'll talk more about that later. Uh, and then the logical scope is sets the boundaries of the process, the size of the project, and you want it to be visual. It's something like this, which we did for our project, which shows the different layers. What's important is what's in scope and what's out of scope, because people might assume there's things in scope that aren't. But here we're laying out what's a dependency and what's dependent on us. Um, for example, in our project, we went into the project with some parallel processes going on. Uh, there was a brand identity switch, so they were redesigning the existing platform because they didn't have time to wait for us to do the migration. So we had to wait for that design to happen before we can migrate. There was also a job job feed that was being worked on internally that would feed into the corporate site. So we were working in collaboration with them to have that functionality happen. So then there's organizational scope. Who's going to be working on this? So for us, we have the web CMS team, and I was the project manager. We were working with the global corporate communications, who were kind of the product owners, and then the corporate communication markets, 70 markets, digital champions that were local, who knew more of the technology, and of course the Drupal agency, which we were working, a partnering with us, Acquia Professional Services, um, and hosting. But then there was also other teams, and it was important to show this in our initiation uh, project to charter, because we were working with other teams in the institution organization, who provided other solutions, like SEO, analytics, uh, Salesforce, things like that. And we also had to work with their external vendors. So there's definitely there were like 20 teams we had to work with, including the creative design agency, the human resources teams, legal, procurement, etc. Another thing to include is a temporal plan, so your estimated timeline with milestones and what are the different dependencies. And here, at this point, you're just keeping it high level. Another consideration is the cost of the project. Is your project constricted by budget, or do you have unlimited funds so you can create all the features you want? Um, so for us, actually, at this point, it's kind of a catch-22, because you don't necessarily have your quotes from your vendors, but you have to give a cost so that you can get the project approval. So we're just looking at other projects, past experience, to come up with that magic number. And a very important point at this stage, you must include 25 to 30% contingency. You will absolutely need it. You need to have that cushion. And then there's the quality management approach. You want to list the standards that are expected to be met and resolved before you can launch. What are the things that you absolutely have to have that you can't go live with? You want to list any industry standards. I mean, for us, we had internal coding guidelines and the standard Drupal best practices. Then you also want to talk about benefits and success factors. So you have to add, why should the project be funding and what's going to happen if it doesn't? I mean, for us, if they didn't fund this project and we couldn't migrate it to Drupal, we were going to have an issue with this. We were going to have unsupported sites that had a risk of critical bugs that couldn't be fixed. And then how does it benefit not only your end user or customer, but also the company and the internal stakeholders? And finally, like the quote at the beginning, how do you know where you're going if you don't, it's like you're not planning it well. So, you don't know where you're going. How can you get there? So these metrics will help you set up and know that you've achieved your goal at the end of the project. Another important thing is to know what are your assumptions and dependencies. Many times in every project, you always have assumptions that you think everybody else knows. So it's important for stakeholders and suppliers to understand these and validate your expectations. So for our project, for example, here's a couple. Um, we said that the platform had to be developed on Drupal 8 with our Nestle Drupal distribution. It had to run a security scan, which is typical of our organization, and the markets would have 2 weeks to review their sites. And another key thing is risk analysis. So you want to think about, look around, it's lurking there somewhere. What are the risks that could derail your project? So you put it in a chart, um, describing it, putting the likelihood is going to happen, the impact that it will happen, and having an action mitigation plan. Who's going to own that plan? So that's an important thing. So that sets up your initiation, your business case and your project charter. And then we move into planning. So maybe you're still waiting for approval, or you've gotten the approval and you're ready to do this. And at this point, plan is important because it'll help you um, set up your project. The worst thing is that I like this quote: bad planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part, because when you have an issue and you're expecting other teams to fix it for you, they've got their own priorities and agendas. They can't just drop everything all the time because you haven't planned well. You want to minimize escalations and keep them for issues that were truly unforeseeable. So you need to put into place several planning actions, which include, you're going to take the charter that you started and expand on that. Do the procurement processes, set up your tools, create a communication plan, and set up your governance. So the core deliverable of a project management manager is the project plan, which sets out what will happen, when, and who's responsible. You're also going to keep fine tuning your budget, because you're out there probably getting quotes at this point. You're starting to schedule the work. And it's a live document that will help you track the progress, and it's going to change throughout the lifetime of your project. And this project plan basically includes all the tasks required in the project. So not only is it the deliverables and the scope, but you have to account for all these other tasks: project management, risk, quality, procurement, communication management. They're all people behind all of these tasks, and you need to account for them. And it could be set up something like this: task item, duration, time start, time end, and resource. So this is a typical project management. Here I used Microsoft Project. I'll talk more about the tools later. And what's important here is to think of all the tasks involved, no matter how small. Um, and there's always hidden ones out there. So you're constantly having to add new tasks as you find them. For instance, one hidden task that we had, um, site labels. Nobody ever thinks to translate them. Site labels are the things that a content editor wouldn't find automatically. So like previous, next, sort by, all those kinds of things. So what is ideal is to create a list of those. Who's going to do that? Send them out to the market, have them translated, put them back in, and get that ready. So that's just one example. And then we move on to detailed requirements, which is a huge topic in and of itself. I'm just going to say, here you're starting to list your features. Maybe you're taking stuff out from your initial charter, you're adding new things. You want to get into detailed descriptions. If possible, add your user stories and acceptance criteria, add user workflows for complex things. And you definitely want to rate them as must to nice to have, because there will be things at the end of the project that need to fall off, and it helps the developers know how to organize that. And the better the more time you take to get those requirements done, the better your estimate's going to be, and the more efficient the whole development and process will be. And then we're going to continue to talk about quality management. So here we're going to start talking about describing the testing approach, and we're going to have details for each test type and cycle. What environment is it going to be done in? Who's going to provide the test data? What's the acceptance criteria for all of these? So, in this project charter, you're starting to add all of this information that we've been talking about. Then we're going to move on to procurement. which, basically every organization does it differently. Just know that your timings can impact delivery times. So for us, I know we had to include 4 to 8 weeks to go through contract and legal and stuff like that. So keep that in mind when you're creating your schedules. And throughout the process, you're getting the invoices paid, making sure that's happening on a timely basis. Now, setting up tools. This seems obvious, but it is so important to know what kind of tools you need and get them going while you're in your planning phase. For us, especially with security and compliance, we have restrictions on which tools we can use. So it's important to agree upon and formalize what they are. And they might be different for your different stakeholders. For example, we might have internal tools that our agency can't use. So you have to have two different things. So think about all of these different areas and formalize them, and then make sure that your stakeholders get access to them at the right time, because that could really block your project. For example, if you need your agency to have access to materials, make sure they can access them. Same with get your markets access to your ticketing tools on a timely basis. Now we're going to move on to communication. So project managers spend 80% of their time communicating. Stakeholders need to get the right information at the right time, and you want to make sure everybody's aligned. So you need to set up the right channels and make sure that your stakeholders are aware of the journey where you are in it. So to do this, you create a communication plan, which includes milestones, receiver, senders, and improvers of each communication, what format you're going to do it in, and then you have to build that initial list, which will take time. And then you're going to have to maintain it because there's going to be a lot of turnover, as I said before. And so it would look something like this in your plan, just a simple chart with the key milestones and the options that I said. Similarly, you want to set up a governance plan. So which, is the framework for how project decisions are made. That's so important to make sure you have a way to reach the people you need when you need decisions. So to do that, you set up a plan of structured meetings or communications to ensure that you have access to the stakeholders you need. So you would set up the frequency, description, participants, and the types of meetings that you would have. And also I include here like the major reports that we would send out and with which frequency. Another governance tool that's important is the RACI matrix. So this sets out who's responsible for doing the task, who owns that task, they're accountable, who's consulted. Consulted are part of the organization, like remember my bubble chart of 20 different teams, that we've set up to provide details and assistance. I mean, usually they are the subject matter experts, and we need two-way communication because if I ask a question, I need their feedback. And informed is basically the stakeholders that are staying up to date, making sure everything's going well, and it's typically one-way communication, the reports. And the RACI matrix looks something like this. On the left side, you have the tasks. You could be as granular as you want, but know that it takes a lot of time to do it. So start off high level and then, go deeper as required. Then on the right side, you list each role and you can organize it. And then you start to plot the different, the RACIs for each role. I mean, here it shows in a sample of some of the roles have more than one. Typically, it's better to just have one. So that is your planning done. And before I move on to execution, I want to talk a little bit about monitoring and control. It involves tracking the actual project performance with the planned project management activities that you have already done. And the control function takes place at all stages of the project. So one thing to keep in mind is nobody has time to read your communication, and they won't read it until they absolutely have to. So you want to keep it simple, short, concise, and visual, one topic, one outcome. And then we're going to go back to risk management, which monitoring and controlling is about avoiding risk. So it's important to go back to the chart we started and keep adding to it. So we're going to create a risk log, and it has the likelihood of unlikely to happen to almost certain to happen. We have our impact from minor to unable to deliver, and we're going to add a risk rating, which is an average of likelihood and impact and shows very low risk to critical risk. If you want to get fancy, you can plot it in a visual. And then, we also add raised by, because there's more people on the project now. You want to give an update of those risks, and you want to close the risk. When do you close a risk? You close a risk when it's no longer a risk or the risk has happened. When the risk happens, it becomes an issue. And at that point, you can keep an issue log. And here's some of the types of columns that you can set it up in. And another important log is a decision log. This is a really important one, because when you're doing a project and you're going from meeting to meeting, you don't necessarily have time to write, detailed meeting notes. So you want to capture the key decisions and who agreed, and who confirmed them and on what date, because you will have to go back to these key decisions at some point. Another useful log is the query log, because again, you're running many different meetings, you're getting a lot of questions from a lot of stakeholders. So it's useful to have this to bring into each of your meetings, and have filtering so you can just focus on the questions for that particular group, and use it as a tool. A couple of other things are the action log and change log. If you think it's useful, you can use those also. Change log, we kind of kept it in our Jira tool that we were using. And another good thing is that all these logs can convert into lessons learned as you do retrospectives or at the end of the project. And finally, for for monitoring and controlling, I also sent out a weekly report. So we created a dashboard, which shows the, kind of like a traffic light trend from the week before and this week, the timeline with where we are in it, completed activities, next steps, and risks. And that's an important section because the stakeholders look at it. And if they see their name called out, um, you know, they will definitely respond to it. And so I would send this out every week. I would take a screenshot of this, put it in the email itself, so people didn't have to open it, although I did give them a link to where they could find the whole file. And I also just kind of wrote a couple of lines detailing the highlights. And finally, in monitoring, the role of the project manager is to unblock any issues every step of the way and help get decisions. And it's to minimize and avoid risk. So finally, we get into the execution. And let's look at our timeline. We started off in February 2018. The idea was to start development in March 2018 and finish by August 2018. But guess what? We had a budget freeze and we couldn't get approval for the project. So it took several months, and we couldn't finally start until October 2018 with the idea to finish in July 2019. So we set off several onboarding meetings, onboarding with the agency, onboarding with the market. We set up the meetings in 2 different time zones because we have global markets. And for the market onboarding, the key feature was to communicate the change. And the biggest change was with the masterization project that we would have a global agency managing the development from now on. So they didn't need the local development agencies to do that work. And any new features would probably go through the global agency. And there was also a new workflow for requesting features and also getting support. And also in the onboarding, we created a packet which we went through, which detailed information about the project and also all of the tasks that we needed them to do. For example, we needed them to give us their IDs for certain credentials of the third-party solutions. And I also created a master tracker. I lived in this document for like a year, and it outlined every single site, their URLs. In fact, some of the URLs changed during the process. Some of the sites consolidated. So we went from 75 sites to 70. Again, we put a place where people could put their credentials. And then I needed the links this for building that mailing list. So who's the website owner, key members, and the local digital manager who had tasks also. We asked them at this point to tell us how many languages they had and the time. And then let's talk a little bit about scheduling. So in the initiation phase, we talk about duration, which are the high level timeframes. In detailed planning, we talk about work breakdown and estimated start and dates for the full project. Now in execution phase, we're going to talk about short interval scheduling, and we have like rolling 8 to 10 week task level views, and we're managing milestones. Um, and so when we were getting into deployment, we were definitely doing a lot of scheduling because there's 70 sites that we have to consider. How are we going to migrate them? Of course, we began with an idealistic idea of how to stagger the migration, and we worked. It was definitely a work in progress, and we worked with the agency to determine the best way to do this. Um, One of the initial ideas was like every 2 days, import the site, work on it, get it out to the markets, and then go live 2 weeks later. Of course, that's not quite how it ended up. It looked more like this because one of the first things that happened is there was an error with the migration export script, so it affected 19 sites. Fortunately, it wasn't that we hadn't gotten that much through the process, but they did have to be done again, and we lost a month and a half. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, okay, there's that end of life timeline happening here. It's getting close. And then also speaking with the agency, we decided it's better if we just batch them up in 1 week at a time and roll it out that way. So we definitely had to do pivot, and the agency was agile enough to work with us on that. So once the agency did their work, because not only was there the migration, but we had to work with doing the development and uh, getting the components done. We used paragraphs, the content types and all that. So then the development team did a lot of quality review of the site, because our goal was to minimize the effort on the markets because they had just gone through um, quality assurance of the redesigned site on the old platform. So when we came time to market acceptance test, and we tried to make it easy on them by having onboarding webinars. We created a separate packet for market acceptance testing, which included what it was about, how to do it, what we were expecting from them, how to report bugs. We provided a support through our workplace chat channel. We definitely didn't want them to be emailing us directly because we wouldn't be able to keep track of it. And also, if they had a question, it's more than likely that other markets had the same question. So, and then we expected some form of sign-off. So we got that done, and then we were ready for go live. So we created a go live calendar. At this point, it was getting close to June, July, and we really didn't have much time for the end of life. So we decided we're going to take the next 10 weeks and go live. We're going to do 2 go lives a week because the go lives included several teams: web CMS, tech support, agency, market. And so we decided to schedule 2 2-hour sessions a week. Typically, the go lives took 1 hour, but in some cases it required 2. And we would just do them in batches of 5. And sure enough, once the markets were clamoring for an exact go live plan, and we had to keep changing it. But once we had the schedule down, it really worked because the markets came on board with it, and we were able to keep to this schedule. After each go live, I sent out an email with access information, next steps, and remaining tasks for each individual market. And of course, I made it festive, congratulating them, etc. And finally, we completed the project September 12th, and we kept a list of, kind of what we were completing. So that kind of, was gratifying. And if we look at the schedule now, We were supposed to finish in July 2019, and we didn't finish until September 2019, but we still had closing activities, which finished officially closed October 2019. And then just to talk a little bit about closing activities, we have, you want to look at your final scope analysis. What didn't get done? Are they still valid? Do we put them in the backlog? Go through your final budget review. How did you do? Make sure you pay off all your invoices. Look at those KPIs you set up. How did you do against them? You want to get formal sign off from your stakeholder to say, yes, we got delivered what we were expected. You want to have a knowledge transfer with your development agency to the maintenance. I mean, sometimes it might be the same team, same agency, but they have different teams. And you want to release those resources. Let them know, yes, you're done. Create a project closure report. You want to communicate to the stakeholders that the project is done. So in our last weekly report, we did just that. And you want to have your lessons learned sessions with, we had several with the agency internally, etc. And most important, you want to give thanks and celebrate in all the ways you can. For us, we're global, so it was already kind of virtual anyway, but especially this past year, it's necessary. And other key learnings, another good thing that came out of the project is we paid it forward. So we took all our templates, cleaned them up, and we created kind of like a PM starter kit. So any other managers, developers, owners could understand the process and have these tools to work with. And here I'm just going to leave you with a list of, what is the project manager role? And a project manager has deliverables. So this chart kind of sums up what we've been talking about. So I'll leave it here you can go back to the recording and look at it more in detail. And another thing, a few weeks ago, I went to a project management conference and somebody presented this canvas, which is like a business canvas, but it's for project, which is kind of a bird's eye view at a glance of everything I've talked about in this session. So I thought it was useful, and I think I'll try to use it in the future. So at the beginning of your project, it always starts off at the best. It's kind of like a house renovation. But something is definitely bound to go wrong. You just don't know what it is yet. So make sure that you start off on the best footing as possible and have all your planning actions in place so that you can, minimize the risk that you will have. Thank you. So we're going to go look into the questions.
Yeah, I think we have 6 minutes to review the questions. We have a couple of questions from Cyprian David. The first one is, I was having a discussion on Twitter this morning about the RASI matrix. Many folk consider it a tool to support finger pointing. We have used it successfully, but had to learn to do that. How does it work in that respect in your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I could see how that happens. I mean, funny enough, the markets themselves were asking me for the RACI matrix. Um, I mean, it's a tool that we use when you're working with 100, 200 people on a project. It's important to have, at least a high level form of it. Um, in terms of the finger pointing, I mean, I think you just kind of have to, um, you have to be human about it, and you have to have a conversation on a different level, because you just have to remind people it's not about the blame. When there's a problem, you all have to get on the same page and move it forward and figure out what's the issue, because you're going to waste time and energy, expend that energy on blaming, and that emotion will prevent you from doing what you have to do.
And then another question from Cyprian also. How are you making sure that future teams use the kit that you prepare?
Well, I'm not sure if you asked that before. I showed you the end piece, but we have an internal site which has a lot of documentation. So we have a section there which is the PM starter kit, and we explain what's in it and how to use it. And this is open to our agencies as well, not just internal. Any other questions? I think that answers the questions. Firan,
Yeah.
that's it.
The yeah, that's it. I don't know if someone wants to add something. We have 5 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm happy to be available. Just please contact me, um, and I'm happy to answer questions. Or if you want to have a discussion, I'm very happy to do that. So thank you so much for attending. So this, kind of wraps it up. If you go into trivia night, have a great time, and I look forward to reaching out to you at future Drupal events and all that. Thank you so much.